I will never forget this annual family reunion. What was supposed to be a night of laughter and celebration turned into something far more terrifying. When I was pregnant, my own mother-in-law tried to push me down the stairs, but in a cruel twist of fate, she pushed her own daughter instead. I can still hear the screams, the gasp of horror, and the sickening thud as her body hit the steps. It could have been me. It should have been me. And in that moment, as I held my belly, one terrifying question echoed in my mind. If I had fallen, would my baby have survived? Hello, my name is Mira Collins, and I'm 28 years old. In just a few months, I'll become a mother for the first time. Pregnancy is a journey filled with excitement, nerves, and 1,000 little worries. But through it all, my husband Daniel Collins has been my rock. Today was supposed to be a joyous occasion, the annual family reunion at Daniel's childhood home. His family estate was breathtaking, surrounded by towering oak trees, with the autumn sun casting golden streaks of light across the vast lawn. I had always imagined that our child would grow up visiting this place, running through the gardens and making memories with family. The scent of roasted meat and freshly baked pies filled the air, and laughter echoed as relatives arrived in waves. I stood beside Daniel, my hand resting on my growing belly, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. "Isn't it wonderful to have everyone here?" I said, trying to focus on the positives. Daniel smiled, squeezing my hand gently. "It is, but just stick close, Mira. You know how my mother can be." At that moment, as if summoned by his words, his mother, Evelyn Collins, appeared in the distance. Her sharp eyes swept over the gathering, scanning every detail with her ever-watchful gaze. Evelyn had always been a difficult presence in my life. She had a habit of evaluating, judging, and subtly criticizing every decision Daniel and I made, especially when it came to me. And now, with our baby on the way, her scrutiny had only intensified. I inhaled deeply, preparing myself. I knew she would have something to say. As the afternoon unfolded, the estate buzzed with energy. Relatives exchanged warm embraces, children ran across the garden, and the clinking of glasses signaled celebration. I did my best to focus on the joy in the air, but I could feel Evelyn's watchful eyes on me, studying every move I made. Daniel's younger sister, Lena Collins, approached us with her usual cheerful energy. Unlike Evelyn, Lena had always been welcoming and kind to me, often acting as a buffer between her mother's sharp words and my patience. "Mira, you look radiant. Pregnancy suits you," Lena beamed, gently placing a hand on my arm. "Thank you," I said, smiling. "I'm just trying to enjoy these last few months before the chaos begins." "Oh, don't worry. You've got this," Lena assured me before turning to Daniel. "And you, how's work? I heard about that tricky case you're handling." Daniel chuckled. "It's complicated, but nothing compared to managing family dynamics." We laughed together, but even as we spoke, my attention drifted toward Evelyn, who stood with a group of aunts, whispering and casting glances in our direction. The tension in my shoulders tightened. Daniel noticed my expression and followed my gaze. "Just ignore it," he muttered under his breath. I wished I could, but I knew Evelyn well enough to sense that she was building up to something. The judgment, the subtle comments, she would never keep them to herself for long. Sure enough, as the sun dipped lower, signaling dinner time, Evelyn moved toward us with a polite yet calculating smile. "Mira, dear," she began sweetly, though I knew better than to trust that tone. "How are you feeling? I do hope you're taking things easy." I forced a smile, keeping my voice steady. "I'm doing well, Evelyn. Daniel has been a great support." She hummed in response, her sharp eyes flicking between us. "That's good to hear. It's just that, with the baby coming, one must be extra careful. Stress isn't good for the mother or the child, you know." I could feel the hidden jab beneath her words. She wasn't just talking about stress. She was implying that I wasn't handling things properly. Daniel interjected quickly. "Mira is taking great care of herself, Mom. No need to worry." Evelyn gave a thin smile. "Of course. I'd just like to stay informed. I was reading an article the other day about how some women push themselves too hard, not realizing the risks." I clenched my jaw, but kept my tone measured. I assure you, Evelyn, I am well aware of what's best for me and my baby. For a moment, she simply looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a slow nod. Well, as long as you're making the right choices. It was always like this, not outright insults, but carefully placed words designed to make me feel inadequate. I exhaled softly, exchanging a glance with Daniel, who was already gripping his wine glass a little too tightly. This perfect family gathering was already starting to unravel, and I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. As the sun set, the family gathered around the long dining table on the lawn. The warm glow of candlelight flickered across smiling faces, the air filled with the sound of clinking silverware and lively conversations. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, savoring a bite of the delicious roasted chicken on my plate. But then, Evelyn chose her seat directly across from me. My grip on my fork tightened. This was no accident. Daniel seemed to sense it too. His posture stiffened, and he subtly reached under the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Dinner had barely begun when Evelyn cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. Daniel, I noticed you've been quite busy with work lately. I just hope you're making enough time to ensure Mira is comfortable in her condition. Her words were sharp yet wrapped in feigned concern, loud enough that several relatives turned their heads. I swallowed my frustration, keeping my expression neutral. Evelyn, I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But thank you for your concern. Daniel immediately backed me up. Mom, Mira is doing great. She's handling everything with grace, and I'm always here to support her. Evelyn's lips thinned as she set her fork down. Well, it's just that with the baby coming, one can't be too careful. I read an article just the other day about how important it is for expectant mothers to avoid unnecessary stress. I could feel the tension building inside me. She wasn't just talking about stress. She was accusing me of not doing enough, of somehow being irresponsible. Really, Evelyn? I assure you I'm fine. Daniel has been wonderful, and Lena has been a great help too. My tone remained polite but firm. Sensing the rising tension, Lena quickly interjected, her voice bright and cheerful. Oh, absolutely. And wait till you see the nursery we've been working on. Daniel, you should show Mom the photos. It's turning out amazing. For a second, I thought the conversation might steer away from me. But Evelyn barely reacted. Instead, she gave a tight smile and took a sip of her wine. And then she struck again. I do wonder, Mira, if you've considered taking some time off work. Surely, you'll need to focus on the baby soon. Some mothers don't realize how overwhelming it can be. My patience snapped. I placed my fork down carefully, meeting her gaze head-on. Evelyn, I love my job. I'm responsible and I know how to balance things. I won't stop doing what I love just because you think I should. Silence fell over the table. Some relatives exchanged uneasy glances, while others nervously sipped their drinks. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but I could see the flicker of irritation behind her eyes. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of the entire family. Daniel, ever the peacemaker, raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast, he announced, his voice warm but firm. To family, whether by blood or by bond, may we always support, respect, and uplift one another. A chorus of agreement followed as glasses clinked together. For a fleeting moment, the tension seemed to ease. Smiles returned to faces, and conversation resumed. But as I glanced across the table, I caught Evelyn watching me over the rim of her wine glass, her eyes calculating. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dinner continued, though the atmosphere remained tense beneath the surface. Conversations carried on, but I could feel the subtle shifts, relatives avoiding direct eye contact, whispered exchanges between aunts, and the occasional glance toward me and Evelyn. Daniel stayed close, his presence grounding me, but I knew him well enough to see that he was also simmering beneath his composed exterior. He hated these passive-aggressive battles just as much as I did. After dessert was served, the guests began to spread out across the estate. Some wandered toward the fireplace in the main hall, others took strolls through the garden, enjoying the crisp evening air. I exhaled deeply, glad to have made it through dinner without things spiraling further. I should have known better. As I excused myself from the table, Lena linked arms with me. Come on, Mira, you have to try Aunt Sylvia's lemon tart. I swear, it's life-changing. I laughed. All right, but only if you promise I won't regret it. We made our way toward the grand staircase, chatting about nursery colors and baby names. It felt good to talk about something normal, something hopeful. But just as we reached the stairs, a voice cut through the air like a blade. Mira, I need to speak with you.
Now.
I froze. I recognized that tone all too well. Evelyn was done with the polite jabs. Now, she wanted confrontation. Lena turned confused. Evelyn, I think you... But she didn't get to finish. Before I could react, Evelyn reached out and shoved Lena. Time slowed. Lena lost her balance. Her arms flailed. Her heels slipped against the polished wood. And then she fell. A collective gasp filled the room as she tumbled down the stairs, her body twisting as she hit each step, landing in a crumpled heap at the bottom. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, Lena! I screamed, racing down the stairs, my heart pounding so violently that I felt dizzy. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands shaking as I touched her arm. She wasn't moving. Someone call an ambulance. Daniel's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. The room erupted into chaos. Relatives rushed forward, some frozen in shock, others whispering in disbelief. Evelyn stood at the top of the staircase, her face pale, her hands trembling. I thought she was Mira, she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. She had meant to push me. My stomach clenched, nausea rising as the reality hit me. If I had been the one standing there, if I had been the one she shoved, would I have been able to protect my baby? Lena lay motionless at the bottom of the staircase, her body twisted unnaturally. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for her, my hands trembling. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but she wasn't responding. The room buzzed with horrified whispers, aunts and uncles frozen in shock, while others rushed forward. My own heart pounded so hard that I felt like I might collapse. Daniel shoved past the stunned crowd and crouched beside me, his fingers quickly pressing against Lena's wrist. Her pulse is weak, he muttered, his voice tight with fear. Where the hell is the ambulance? His question was barely out of his mouth when the distant sound of sirens pierced through the night air. I turned my gaze upward, locking eyes with Evelyn. She stood at the top of the stairs, her face drained of color, her hands clasped together as if she couldn't believe what she had done. But I knew better. She had meant to push me. She had mistaken Lena for me, and in her desperation to teach me a lesson, she had nearly killed her own niece. Why? My voice was raw with disbelief and fury. Why would you do this? Evelyn took a shaky step forward, but Daniel was on his feet in an instant, raising a hand to stop her. Stay away, he warned, his voice dangerously low. His mother flinched, but I couldn't find it in me to feel any sympathy. Not after what she had done. Not after she had proven what I had feared all along. She was dangerous. The paramedics arrived and quickly assessed Lena's condition. They strapped her onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask placed over her face as they carried her out of the house. Daniel and I followed, barely aware of the hushed conversations happening behind us. I could hear some relatives trying to defend Evelyn, whispering that it was just a mistake, that she had only meant to talk to me. But others weren't so forgiving. I caught glimpses of my father-in-law, William, his face a storm of emotions as he turned away from his wife, unable to even look at her. As the ambulance doors closed, I climbed into the back with Lena, while Daniel stayed behind to handle things. My hands never left hers the entire ride to the hospital. She had been caught in the middle of something that wasn't her fight. She had been hurt because of Evelyn's obsession with controlling me, her irrational belief that I wasn't good enough for her son. And now, whatever fragile bond still existed between us was broken beyond repair. That night, as I sat in the hospital waiting room with Daniel, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. Evelyn had crossed a line that could never be undone. I wasn't just going to stand by and let her get away with it. She had almost killed Lena. Next time, she might actually succeed. And I wasn't going to wait around for next time. Daniel, I said, my voice calm but unwavering. We have to press charges. His head snapped up, exhaustion and grief heavy in his eyes. He didn't hesitate. I know. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sterile air, the beeping of monitors filling the quiet tension that hung around us. I sat beside Lena's bed, her face pale against the stark white sheets. Her head was wrapped in bandages, her arm in a cast, and the bruises forming along her skin told a painful story of what had happened that night. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as guilt gnawed at my insides. This should have been me. It was supposed to be me. Evelyn had meant to push me down those stairs, and because of her blind hatred, her own niece lay here, broken, injured, and unconscious. Daniel stood by the window, his back to me, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't spoken much since we arrived at the hospital, but I knew what was going through his mind. He had spent his entire life respecting his mother, defending her, excusing her sharp words and controlling behavior. But tonight, she had shattered whatever image he still had of her. This wasn't just verbal manipulation or emotional games. This was an act of violence, one that could have been deadly. A knock at the door interrupted the silence. A tall officer stepped inside, his notepad in hand. Mr. and Mrs. Collins? His gaze flickered between us before settling on me. I'm Officer Grant. I understand there was an incident at your family gathering tonight, and I'd like to take your statements. I felt Daniel stiffen beside me, but before he could speak, I straightened my shoulders and nodded.
Yes.
I'd like to file a formal complaint. Evelyn Collins attacked Lena Richardson, intentionally. The words felt heavy but also right. This wasn't just some family misunderstanding. Evelyn had crossed a criminal line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Daniel let out a slow breath and finally turned to face the officer. We have CCTV footage from the house. It shows my mother pushing Lena. There's no way she can deny it. Officer Grant jotted something down before looking back at me. Would you be willing to testify against her if this goes to court? I hesitated for only a second before answering. Absolutely. I knew this meant war. Evelyn had spent years trying to undermine me, trying to make me feel like I didn't belong in her family. But I wasn't the weak, insecure woman she thought I was. I was stronger than that. Strong enough to fight for justice. For Lena. For my baby. As the officer left to begin the legal process, I turned to Daniel, searching his face for any hesitation. Are you sure about this? I asked quietly. Pressing charges against your own mother, it's not easy. His jaw clenched, and when he met my gaze, there was no doubt in his eyes. She nearly killed my sister, Mira. There's nothing to debate. And just like that, the decision was made. Evelyn was going to face the consequences. By the time we left the hospital, the reality of what we had set into motion began to sink in. Daniel and I drove back to the estate in silence, the weight of our decision hanging between us like an unspoken truth. It was nearly midnight when we arrived, but the house was still alive with hushed conversations and tensions so thick it was suffocating. Relatives lingered in clusters, some whispering, others openly debating about what had happened. The moment we stepped inside, all eyes turned toward us, waiting for some kind of resolution that wasn't ours to give. Evelyn was nowhere in sight, but I knew she was inside. She had nowhere else to go. I had expected her to run, to at least try and escape what was coming, but deep down I knew Evelyn wasn't the kind of woman who believed she would ever face real consequences. She had spent her life controlling narratives, twisting facts to suit her needs. This time, though, the truth was undeniable. As Daniel and I made our way to the living room, his father, William Collins, stood up from a chair near the fireplace. The man had always been quiet, someone who kept the peace rather than engaging in conflicts. But tonight, his face was lined with exhaustion, his usual indifference replaced with something unreadable. Did you really call the police? His voice was low, but there was no anger, just disbelief. Daniel didn't hesitate. We had to, Dad. Lena is in the hospital. She could have died. William sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. I never thought it would come to this. He turned his tired gaze toward me. And you? Are you really going to press charges against Evelyn? I met his eyes, unflinching. Yes. A tense silence followed. I could hear murmurs from the other relatives, some shifting uncomfortably. I knew some of them felt Evelyn didn't deserve to be arrested, that this was a family matter that should be handled privately. But if we had let it go, what message would that have sent? That power and control could excuse violence? That a near-death experience was just something to be forgiven because it happened within the family? Suddenly, Evelyn entered the room, her expression carefully controlled. Her eyes met mine, cold and assessing, as if she was still trying to understand how things had escalated this far. Her gaze then shifted to Daniel, softening just slightly. You really called the police on your own mother? You left me no choice, Daniel replied, his voice calm but firm. You tried to hurt Mira, and you nearly killed Lena instead. Evelyn let out a harsh breath, shaking her head. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. It was a mistake, Daniel. You're blowing this out of proportion. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain composed. A mistake? I repeated, my voice steady despite the fury bubbling beneath. You grabbed her. You pushed her. You were trying to push me. If it had been me at the top of those stairs, what do you think would have happened? For the first time that night, uncertainty flashed across Evelyn's face. But she recovered quickly, her mask of control snapping back into place. I was only trying to talk to you. Before Daniel or I could respond, the unmistakable sound of police sirens filled the air outside. The murmurs in the room turned to complete silence as the red and blue lights flashed against the windows. Evelyn's face paled. You actually went through with it, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. A loud knock on the front door sent a jolt through the room. William hesitated for only a second before stepping forward and opening it. Officer Grant stood there, his expression neutral but firm. Evelyn Collins? Evelyn inhaled sharply, her composure cracking. She turned to Daniel, her voice almost pleading. You can still stop this. Daniel didn't say a word. The officer stepped inside, pulling out his handcuffs. Mrs. Collins, you are under arrest for assault and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. I barely heard the rest. Evelyn had always believed herself to be untouchable, that she could say and do as she pleased without consequence. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she was facing the reality of her actions. As the police led her out of the house, past the silent, stunned relatives, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The war wasn't over, not yet. But tonight, we had won the first battle. The trial began 2 months later. By then, Lena had mostly recovered, though she still walked with a slight limp. She had suffered a concussion and a broken leg, and while the physical wounds would heal, the betrayal she had felt from Evelyn, her own aunt, was something that couldn't be erased. I sat beside Daniel in the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The air was heavy with tension as we waited for the judge to enter. Evelyn sat across the room, her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. She had spent her entire life controlling how people saw her, shaping reality to fit her desires. But today, she had no control. Today, the evidence would speak for itself. The prosecutor wasted no time laying out the facts. He detailed the night of the incident, the family tensions that had led up to it, and the fact that Evelyn had deliberately pushed Lena, mistaking her for me. The courtroom listened in silence as he played the CCTV footage, the grainy black and white video showing Evelyn reaching out, grabbing Lena's arm, and shoving her down the stairs. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Even though I had seen the footage before, watching it again made my stomach churn. There was no denying it now. This wasn't an accident. Lena was called to testify first. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady, but laced with pain. I remember walking up the stairs with Mira. We were talking, laughing, and then I heard Evelyn call her name. I turned, thinking she was talking to me. Before I could say anything, She grabbed my arm and shoved me. I lost my balance. I remember falling, hitting the steps. I remember the pain. But the worst part? Her eyes flickered to Evelyn, who sat motionless. She didn't even come to help me. She just stood there. Evelyn's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Evelyn had merely meant to stop me, not harm anyone. But the video told a different story. Evelyn had acted with intent. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my heart pounding as I took my place on the witness stand. Evelyn has never liked me. I began, my voice calm but strong. She has spent years undermining me, making me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son. When I got pregnant, it got worse. She made comments about my job, about my ability to be a mother. She saw me as a threat. I turned to face the jury. That night, she wanted to push me. She wanted to remind me that she was in control. But she got the wrong person. And instead of stopping to help her own niece, she stood there and let it happen. Daniel spoke last. He had always been the quiet one when it came to his mother's behavior, always trying to keep the peace. But today, he didn't hold back. I've defended my mother my whole life. I've made excuses for her. But this is something I can't ignore. My sister almost died because of her. My wife could have been the one lying in that hospital bed. And if I don't stand for what's right now, then what kind of man am I? The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with the verdict. We find the defendant, Evelyn Collins, guilty of aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. The judge's sentence was swift. 5 years in prison. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some relatives gasped. Others simply looked away, unable to process what had just happened. But Evelyn? She didn't flinch. For the first time, she had lost control and she knew it. As the bailiff led her away, she turned one last time to Daniel. "I only wanted what was best for you," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. It was over. Evelyn was gone, and we could finally start to rebuild our lives, without fear. As the courtroom emptied, I sat still for a moment, absorbing everything that had just happened. Evelyn was gone, sentenced to 5 years in prison for what she had done. Even though it was justice, it still felt surreal. For years, she had controlled so much of our lives with her words, her judgments, and her presence. And now, for the first time, she had no power over us. Daniel and I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face like a reset. Lena was already waiting for us, standing near the courthouse steps. She still had a brace around her wrist from the fall, but her smile was real. She looked relieved, lighter, even. "I can't believe it's finally over," she said, exhaling as if she had been holding her breath for months. Daniel nodded, his arm tightening around my waist. "Neither can I." He glanced at Lena, his expression softening. "How are you feeling?" Lena shrugged, but there was strength in her posture. "Better. Still sore sometimes, but I'll recover." Her eyes darkened for a moment before she added, "It's weird, though. I keep thinking about how it could have been worse. How it was supposed to be Mira instead of me." A lump formed in my throat. She was right. That night could have ended so differently. I placed a protective hand over my stomach, feeling a deep sense of gratitude that my baby had been spared from Evelyn's hatred. "I'm just glad you're okay," I told Lena, "and that she's finally facing the consequences of what she's done." As we stood together, I saw Daniel's father, William, walking toward us. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. When he reached us, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked at Daniel, then at Lena, and finally at me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "For everything. I should have stepped in a long time ago. I should have." He hesitated, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. But I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. Evelyn made her choices. And now, she has to live with them." I had expected resistance from him, maybe even some denial. But instead, he looked tired, like a man who had finally stopped pretending everything was fine. Daniel exhaled, nodding. "I know, Dad. And I appreciate you saying that." William hesitated for a moment longer before turning to me. Mira, I hope one day you'll be able to forgive her. I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness wasn't something Evelyn had earned. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't know if I can, I admitted honestly. But I do know that I'm ready to move forward. Without her. William nodded, accepting my words without argument. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of people leaving the courthouse. As we stood there in the fading afternoon light, Daniel looked down at me, his expression filled with quiet determination. Let's go home. I smiled, leaning into him. Home sounds perfect. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. No more fear. No more tension. No more walking on eggshells around a woman who had tried to control every part of our lives. Now, Daniel and I could finally focus on what truly mattered: our future, our baby, and the family we were creating together. The nightmare was over, and a new beginning had just begun.